The whole world was screaming his name when I saw him again. Fireworks exploded across the stadium. Blue and silver confetti rained from the sky while millions of fans chanted for the man standing at the center of it all, like he belonged to another universe. Paul Callahan, Champions League winner, the most celebrated footballer in Europe, the man every sports channel called untouchable, and the same man who vanished 5 years ago with my entire life savings. My fingers tightened around the remote as the cameras zoomed in on his face. Older now, sharper, more expensive looking. The boy I once shared instant noodles with in a freezing apartment had become the kind of man people built billboards around. But all I could remember was the night he disappeared. The unanswered phone calls, the empty closet, the bank notification showing my account had been wiped clean. I remembered sitting on my kitchen floor until sunrise, convincing myself there had to be a mistake. Paul loved me. Paul would never do this to me. Except he did. For 5 years, I rebuilt my life from the ashes he left behind while the world turned him into a hero. And tonight, I made the mistake of watching him win everything we once dreamed about together. The commentators were shouting so loudly I almost missed the interviewer asking him the final question. "Paul," she said with a bright smile, "who were you thinking about when you lifted that trophy tonight?" The entire stadium roared around him. But Paul suddenly went quiet. His eyes lifted slowly toward the camera, toward me, and then, with tears shining in his eyes, he said softly, "There's someone watching tonight who deserved this moment more than I ever did. I betrayed her 5 years ago, and not a single day has passed where I haven't regretted it." My blood ran cold, because I knew he was talking about me. And for the first time in 5 years, Paul Callahan had finally come back. I didn't sleep that night. After the interview ended, I turned the television off and sat alone in silence while the city lights flickered weakly through my apartment window. My hands were still shaking. 5 years. 5 whole years without hearing Paul Callahan's voice. And somehow, after all that time, he still knew exactly how to ruin my peace. I kept telling myself it shouldn't matter anymore. He was just a man from my past. A mistake. A scar I had already survived. So why did my chest hurt like someone had ripped it open all over again? My phone buzzed against the coffee table. Unknown number. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A second later, another message appeared. Unknown number. I know you probably hate me. But please, just let me explain. My stomach twisted instantly. I didn't need to ask who it was. Only one person still had the power to make my heartbeat feel like this. I threw the phone face down onto the couch and stood up too quickly, pacing the apartment like I could outrun the memories clawing their way back into my head. But memories don't disappear just because you want them to. Especially memories of someone you once loved more than yourself. 5 years earlier, Paul and I had lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat with broken heating and windows that rattled every time buses passed outside. The place smelled permanently like detergent and old pipes, but back then, I thought it was perfect. Because he was there. Paul used to sit at the edge of our bed after football practice, exhausted and sweaty, apologizing for how little he had to offer me. "I'll make it one day," he would say quietly while holding my hands against his chest. "And when I do, I swear I'll give you everything." And stupidly, I believed him. No one believed in Paul back then except me. His coaches thought he was talented but unrealistic. His family thought football was a dead-end dream. Even his closest friends told him to quit chasing Europe and settle for local league football. But every time he wanted to give up, I pushed him forward again. I worked extra shifts at the cafe, I skipped meals so we could afford his training fees. I sold my father's vintage watch after he died, because Paul needed money to travel for a football trial in Spain. I never regretted any of it. Not then. Because when someone loves you the way Paul used to look at me, sacrifice doesn't feel painful. It feels natural. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I never stopped looking for you. I laughed bitterly under my breath. Looking for me? That was funny. Because 5 years ago, I searched for him until I nearly destroyed myself. I called every hospital in the city, every football contact he ever mentioned, every teammate, every agency. Nothing. Paul vanished like he had never existed. The only thing he left behind was an empty bank account and enough debt to nearly drown me. I still remembered the humiliation of that morning, standing inside my bank while the woman behind the counter avoided eye contact as she explained my savings account had been cleared out overnight. Every cent gone. Money I spent years saving. Money meant for my future. Money Paul promised he only needed temporarily. At the time, I defended him even then. There has to be a mistake, I kept saying. But there wasn't. There was never a mistake. Just betrayal. My chest tightened painfully as I walked toward the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water with trembling hands. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. The same kind of rain from the night Paul disappeared. I closed my eyes for 1 second and instantly saw him again, standing at the train station in his dark hoodie, football bag slung over one shoulder, smiling at me like I was the only thing keeping him alive. "When I make it," he whispered while kissing my forehead, "I'm taking you with me." That was the last time I ever saw him. Until tonight. Another buzz. This time it wasn't a message. It was a news notification. Paul Callahan's mystery woman sends internet into frenzy. I froze, then slowly clicked it open. There, beneath the headline, was an old photograph of me and Paul from years ago. My blood ran cold, because suddenly, my quiet little life was no longer quiet anymore. By morning, the internet had already ruined my life again. I knew it before I even opened my eyes. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating against the nightstand beside my bed. Messages, notifications, unknown calls coming in one after another like sirens. For one terrifying second, I thought someone had died. Then I opened my phone and saw my face everywhere. A blurry photograph from years ago had somehow resurfaced online. In it, I was standing beside Paul outside a train station, laughing while he wrapped an arm around my shoulders. I looked younger there, softer, happier, back when I still believed love could protect people. The headline underneath the photo made my stomach twist. "Who is Paul Callahan's mystery woman?" Another article read, "The football star's emotional confession has fans searching for his secret ex." I dropped the phone onto the blanket like it burned me. No. This couldn't be happening. I had spent 5 years disappearing on purpose. 5 years rebuilding a quiet life where nobody knew my name. Nobody knew what happened to me. Nobody knew about the humiliation of being abandoned by the man I loved after giving him everything. And now? Now strangers were turning my heartbreak into entertainment. My phone rang again. This time it was Evelyn. I stared at her name for a moment before answering. "Olla," she said immediately. "Please tell me you've seen what's happening online." "I've seen enough." "Oh my God." She exhaled sharply. "This is insane. Sports blogs are reposting your pictures everywhere. Some people are saying you're the reason Paul became successful." I laughed bitterly. "Funny. Last time I checked, I was the idiot he robbed." There was silence on the line for a second. Evelyn had been there through all of it. She was the one who found me crying on my kitchen floor after Paul disappeared. The one who helped me negotiate with debt collectors when I couldn't pay rent anymore. The one who stayed awake with me during nights I genuinely thought my life was over. So she knew better than anyone how dangerous this was for me. "Olla," her voice softened carefully. "Are you okay?" "No." And for the first time in years, I told the truth. "No, I'm not okay." Because seeing Paul again had ripped open wounds I spent years stitching shut. I got out of bed and walked toward the tiny kitchen window overlooking the street below. Rainwater still clung to the sidewalks from last night's storm. People hurried past with umbrellas, completely unaware that my entire world felt like it was collapsing again. Evelyn stayed quiet before finally asking the question I knew was coming. Did he really take the money? My chest tightened instantly. 5 years later, and even hearing the question still hurt. "Yes," I whispered. "The money disappeared the same night he did. But did you ever actually see him take it?" I frowned. "What kind of question is that?" "I'm serious, Olla." I pressed a hand against my forehead, exhausted already. "Evelyn, stop. Don't do this." "Do what?" "Try to make this complicated." My voice cracked slightly. "He vanished. My savings vanished. Then he became rich and famous. It's not exactly a mystery." But even as I said the words, something uncomfortable twisted inside me. Because the truth was, I never actually saw Paul take the money himself. I only knew the transfer had happened from a shared account he had access to. At the time, I didn't question it. I was too devastated to think clearly, and Paul never came back to explain. So what else was I supposed to believe? A knock suddenly sounded at my apartment door. I froze. 3 more knocks followed immediately after. "Olla," Evelyn said through the phone. "What's wrong?" "I think someone's outside." A horrible feeling settled in my stomach as I walked slowly toward the door. Another knock. Firmer this time. I looked through the peephole, and my blood ran cold. Two men stood outside my apartment building holding cameras. Reporters. "Oh my God," I whispered. "What?" Evelyn asked sharply. "They found me." The reporters were speaking to each other excitedly while checking their phones. One of them held a printed photograph in his hand. My photograph. Panic surged through me instantly. I stepped backward away from the door like they might somehow see through it. "How did they get my address?" I whispered. "Olla, listen to me carefully," Evelyn said quickly. "Don't open that door." The reporters knocked again. "Miss Bennett," one called loudly. "We just want a quick comment about Paul Callahan." I closed my eyes. 5 years ago, Paul destroyed my life privately. Now he was destroying it publicly. And the worst part? A small, broken part of me still wanted to know why he looked so devastated while saying my name last night. Another buzz lit up my phone. "Unknown number. Please don't be afraid. I'd never let anyone hurt you." My heart stopped. Because this time, there was no doubt at all. It was Paul. I didn't leave my apartment for 3 days. Not because I wanted to hide, but because every time I looked at my phone, another piece of my past was waiting for me there. Sports pages, fan edits, old photographs, people dissecting my life like it belonged to them. Some called me the woman who built Paul Callahan. Others called me a liar trying to cash in on his fame. One account posted, "If she really loved him, why disappear for 5 years?" I nearly laughed reading that. Disappear? I was the one abandoned. The internet had turned my heartbreak into some romantic mystery while I sat alone eating instant noodles in an apartment barely bigger than my old bedroom. Meanwhile, Paul was trending worldwide. Again, I tossed my phone onto the couch and rubbed my eyes painfully. I hadn't slept properly since the Champions League final. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him again standing beneath those stadium lights looking straight into the camera like he still knew me. Like he still had the right. A loud knock suddenly echoed through the apartment. I stiffened instantly. "Olla," Evelyn's voice called from outside. "Open the door before you become one with the furniture in there." Relief flooded through me. I unlocked the door quickly, and Evelyn walked inside carrying coffee cups and a paper bag filled with pastries. She stopped the second she saw my face. "Oh wow," she muttered. "You look terrible." "Thank you. I mean genuinely haunted." "That's better." She placed the coffees down and pulled me into a quick hug before stepping back to study me carefully. "You've been crying." "I haven't." "Olla." I looked away. That was answer enough. Evelyn sighed softly and handed me coffee before sitting across from me at the kitchen counter. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she finally asked quietly, "Did you love him that much?" The question caught me off guard, because after 5 years of anger, humiliation, and survival, I had almost forgotten there was once love underneath all that pain. I stared down into my coffee. "Yes," I whispered eventually. "I loved him enough to ruin myself." And that was the truth no one else understood. People looked at my story now and saw betrayal. But before the betrayal came love. The kind of love that changes your entire life around another person. Back then, Paul wasn't famous. He was just a stubborn boy with impossible dreams and worn-out football boots held together with tape. I met him when I was 23. He was practicing alone at a public football field during winter while snow covered half the ground. Everyone else had already gone home, but Paul stayed out there kicking a ball against a cracked wall over and over again until his hands turned red from the cold. I remembered standing there watching him like he was insane. "You know, normal people go inside when it snows, right?" I shouted at him. He looked up breathless, hair damp with melting snow, and grinned. "Normal people don't play Champions League football." I rolled my eyes so hard I almost walked away. Instead, I bought him coffee. That stupid coffee ruined my life. Evelyn smiled faintly while listening to me. "You never talk about the beginning anymore." "Because beginnings are dangerous," I said quietly. "They make you forget endings." But the memories kept coming anyway. Paul walking me home after late cafe shifts. Paul falling asleep on my shoulder during bus rides. Paul kissing my forehead while promising me we'd leave our tiny city together someday. And the way he looked at me back then. God. Sometimes I hated myself for still remembering it. Because before the money disappeared, before the betrayal, before the silence, Paul used to love me so openly it frightened me. A sudden buzz interrupted my thoughts. My stomach dropped instantly. Unknown number. Again. Evelyn noticed my expression immediately. "Him." I nodded slowly. This time, the message was different. Unknown number. I'm outside. Every muscle in my body froze. What? Evelyn grabbed my phone quickly and read the message herself. Absolutely not. Another message appeared immediately after. Unknown number. Please, Olla. Just 5 minutes. My heart started pounding violently. No, I wasn't ready for this. 5 years ago, Paul disappeared from my life without giving me a choice. Now he suddenly wanted to show up at my door like none of it happened? Evelyn stood immediately and walked toward the window, overlooking the street. Then her entire expression changed. Oh my God. Fear crawled up my spine. What? She looked back at me slowly. He's really here. I stood frozen for a second before moving toward the window beside her. And there he was. Paul Callahan stood across the street wearing a black hoodie and baseball cap pulled low over his face. But even dressed down, he still attracted attention instantly. A few people nearby were already whispering while staring at him in disbelief. But Paul wasn't looking at them. He was staring directly at my apartment window. At me. 5 years disappeared in a single heartbeat. Because suddenly, I wasn't 31 and emotionally exhausted anymore. I was 26 again, standing in the rain, waiting for the man I loved to come back. And the terrifying part? A piece of me still wanted him to. I don't know how long I stood there staring at him through the window. Seconds, minutes, maybe longer. The city kept moving around him while my entire body forgot how to function. Cars passed. Rainwater dripped from street signs. People slowed down after recognizing who he was. But Paul never looked away from my building. From me. Evelyn gently touched my arm. Olla, breathe. I hadn't realized I stopped. I stepped backward from the window, immediately, pulse hammering so hard it hurt. No, I whispered. No, I can't do this. You don't have to. But another message appeared before I could answer. Unknown number. If you want me to leave, I will. Just please let me see you once. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. 5 years ago, I begged for explanations that never came. Now suddenly he wanted to talk? Now he wanted closure? Anger surged through me so fast it almost felt good. Unbelievable, I muttered. Evelyn folded her arms carefully. You don't owe him anything. I know. Then don't go. I looked back toward the window again despite myself. Paul still hadn't moved. And seeing him there like that, soaked slightly by the rain, exhausted, almost nervous, felt dangerously familiar. Because before he became famous, Paul used to wait for me exactly like that after my cafe shifts ended late at night. Leaning against walls, hands shoved into his pockets, looking at me like I was the best part of his entire day. I hated that my heart still remembered those things. You should call security, Evelyn said firmly. But I already knew I wouldn't. And maybe that made me weak. Or maybe some wounds never fully close no matter how hard you try to bury them. I grabbed my coat before I could change my mind. Evelyn's eyes widened immediately. Olla, I'm not forgiving him, I said quickly. I need to hear whatever lie he came here to tell. That man destroyed your life. I know. So why are your hands shaking? Because deep down, a terrifying part of me still cared whether Paul regretted it. I took the elevator downstairs feeling like I was walking toward my own execution. Every second made my chest tighter. By the time I stepped outside the apartment building, the cold air hit my face sharply enough to make me dizzy. Paul saw me instantly. And for one awful moment, neither of us moved. God. 5 years had changed him. The boy I remember had become harder somehow. Broader shoulders. Sharper jawline. Expensive watch glinting beneath his sleeve. Fame sat on him now like something heavy and permanent. But his eyes looked exactly the same. The same eyes that once watched me like losing me would destroy him. The irony almost made me sick. People nearby had already started whispering after recognizing him. Phones were quietly lifting into the air around us. Paul noticed too. His jaw tightened immediately before he stepped closer carefully. Olla. Just hearing him say my name again nearly shattered me. Because for 5 years, I imagined this moment differently. I imagined screaming at him, slapping him, demanding answers. Instead, I stood there completely frozen while old feelings clawed their way back to life against my will. You shouldn't have come here, I said quietly. I know. Then why did you? Paul swallowed hard before answering. Because I couldn't lose you again. I actually laughed at that. A sharp, broken sound. You lost me. I stared at him in disbelief. Paul, you disappeared. Pain flashed across his face instantly. I know how it looked. How it looked. My voice rose before I could stop it. You vanished with my savings, Paul. People nearby were definitely listening now, but I didn't care anymore. For 5 years, I carried this humiliation alone while he became the world's favorite football star. He could survive one uncomfortable conversation. You emptied our account, I continued, voice shaking now. Then you disappeared without a word. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Paul looked genuinely sick hearing it aloud. And somehow that hurt worse. Because if he looked guilty now, then maybe he always knew exactly what he'd done. I tried to come back, he said quietly. No, you didn't. Yes. You became famous instead. His entire expression tightened painfully. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? I demanded. Silence. Rain tapped softly against the pavement between us. For 1 second, Paul looked exactly like the boy I used to know. Exhausted. Cornered. Afraid. Then he reached slowly into his coat pocket. I need you to see something. Every instinct inside me screamed not to trust him. But before I could respond, a sudden wave of camera flashes exploded from across the street. Someone shouted, Paul, is that your ex-girlfriend? More people started turning toward us immediately. Phones lifted higher, voices spread, footsteps approached. And just like that, the private moment shattered. Paul's face darkened instantly. Then before I could react, he grabbed my wrist gently. We need to leave. Now. Paul pulled me through the growing crowd before I could even process what was happening. Camera flashes exploded around us while people shouted his name from every direction. Oh my God, it's really him. Paul. Over here. Is that the woman from the interview? I tried jerking my wrist free immediately. Let go of me. But Paul only tightened his grip slightly while guiding me toward a black SUV parked further down the street. If we stay here, they'll follow you home, he said sharply. And whose fault is that? His jaw clenched hard enough for me to notice. Mine. That single unspoken answer hung painfully between us. A security guard rushed forward to open the SUV door while more people gathered around us with phones raised high. Paul finally let go of my wrist once we got inside the vehicle, but the warmth of his hand still burned against my skin. The door slammed shut behind us, cutting off the noise outside almost instantly. Silence filled the car. Heavy. Awkward. Dangerous. For the first time in 5 years, I was completely alone with him again. And somehow, that terrified me more than the reporters outside. Paul sat across from me breathing hard, his hood pushed back now. Up close, he looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Dark circles shadowed his eyes beneath the polished image the world usually saw on television. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I looked around the luxury interior bitterly. Nice car. Paul glanced at me carefully before looking away. I didn't bring you here to impress you. No, I said coldly. You already did that on live television. Pain flickered across his face again. I hated that expression, because every time he looked hurt, a part of me forgot I was supposed to hate him. I shouldn't have said your name publicly, he admitted quietly. You think. I wasn't thinking clearly. I laughed once under my breath. That's familiar. The words hit him hard. Good. For years, I imagined what I would say if I ever saw him again. I imagined speeches filled with anger and dignity. But sitting here now, all I felt was exhaustion. Paul stared at his hands for a second before speaking again. You look different. I blinked at him in disbelief. That's what you have to say to me after 5 years? No. His voice softened. It's just you used to smile more. Something inside my chest twisted painfully. Because once upon a time, Paul was the reason I smiled at all. I looked out the tinted window quickly before he could see my expression change. You lost the right to notice things about me. Silence again. The rain outside had grown heavier now, droplets sliding down the windows while distant camera flashes still flickered outside the vehicle. Paul finally reached into his coat pocket slowly. You asked what happened, he said quietly. So I'm going to tell you the truth. He handed me a worn leather wallet. Confused, I frowned and opened it carefully. Inside was an old photograph. My breath caught instantly. It was us, taken years ago in front of our apartment above the laundromat. I remembered that day. Paul had just been rejected from another football trial, and I bought cheap takeaway noodles to cheer him up. Halfway through dinner, he pulled me outside because it started snowing. You know what this means? He asked excitedly while spinning me around in the street. What? My lucky season starts now. I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly fell over. Then he kissed me while snow fell around us. Someone nearby took the picture. And somehow, Paul still carried it. My chest tightened dangerously. I don't care about old photos, I whispered, handing it back. But Paul didn't take it. Instead, he pulled something else from his pocket. A folded bank receipt. My stomach dropped the second I saw the account number. Our old joint account. The account that emptied the night he disappeared. My fingers started trembling before I even unfolded the paper completely. Then I saw the date. 5 years ago. The exact night Paul vanished. But what froze my blood wasn't the transaction itself. It was the name attached to it. Not Paul Callahan. I stared at the receipt in confusion, then looked up slowly. What is this? Paul's voice was barely above a whisper now. The reason I came back. I looked down again at the document, heart pounding violently. Because according to the receipt, someone else transferred the money. And suddenly, for the first time in 5 years, I realized I might not know the full truth at all. I read the bank receipt 3 times before my brain finally accepted what I was seeing. Then a 4th time. Then a 5th. Because it didn't make sense. The account number was ours. The amount transferred was my life savings. The date matched the exact night Paul disappeared. But the sender's name wasn't his. My fingers tightened around the paper. What is this? I asked again, quieter this time. Paul watched me carefully like he was afraid I might break apart in front of him. I found out 2 years after I left, he said slowly. But by then, you were already gone. I looked up sharply. Gone. You disappeared, Olla. The audacity of that almost made me laugh. I disappeared? I stared at him in disbelief. Paul, you vanished without a word. I stayed in the same apartment for almost a year waiting for you. Pain flashed across his face instantly. I know. No, you don't. My voice cracked despite myself. You have no idea what those months were like. And suddenly, all the memories I spent years suppressing came crashing back at once. The debt collectors banging on my door at 7 in the morning, the landlord threatening eviction, the humiliation of borrowing money from Evelyn just to buy groceries. But worst of all, the waiting. God, the waiting destroyed me more than the money ever did. Every morning I woke up thinking maybe today Paul would finally call. Maybe today there would be an explanation that made all of it hurt less. But the calls never came. Only silence. I thought you left me, I whispered before I could stop myself. Paul looked like I had physically hit him. Olla. No. I shook my head quickly, furious tears already burning my eyes. You don't get to say my name like that. The SUV suddenly felt too small, too warm, too full of old ghosts. I pushed the bank receipt back toward him. So who transferred the money? Paul hesitated, and that hesitation terrified me instantly. Because people only hesitate when the truth is dangerous. My former manager, he said finally. I frowned immediately. Manager? His name was Victor Hale. The name meant nothing to me. Paul leaned back against the seat heavily, exhaustion written all over his face. When I got invited for the Barcelona development trials, Victor approached me. He said he could help build my career internationally. Something bitter twisted inside me. Because I remembered those days clearly. Paul used to walk around our apartment barely sleeping, terrified of missing his chance. Every football scout felt like a lifeline back then. He promised contracts, Paul continued quietly. Sponsors. European connections. Everything I thought I needed. And Paul looked away toward the rain-covered window. And he told me you were holding me back. The words landed harder than they should have. Even after everything, hearing that still hurt. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. So you listened to him? No. His answer came instantly. That's not what happened. Then explain it to me, Paul. Because from where I'm sitting, you disappeared the second fame got close enough to touch. His jaw tightened painfully. You think I wanted to leave you? You did leave. For 1 week. I blinked. What? Paul looked back at me slowly. The Barcelona trip was only supposed to last 1 week. Victor arranged everything. Flights, contracts, temporary housing. His voice lowered. I plan to come back for you immediately after signing. I stared at him silently. Because 5 years ago, that was exactly what Paul told me at the train station. 1 week. I tried calling you the first night I arrived, he continued. Your number was disconnected. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. I thought you blocked me. I would never. I stopped myself suddenly, because I remembered something. 3 days after Paul disappeared, my phone service got suspended because I couldn't pay the bill anymore. At the time, I barely noticed. I was too busy falling apart. Paul reached into his pocket again, and this time handed me an old cracked phone. I kept this. My chest tightened painfully. It was his old phone from years ago. The wallpaper still showed us together. My throat closed instantly. There are hundreds of messages on there, he said quietly. Messages I sent you. Messages you never answered. I stared at him without breathing. No. You can check. No, I repeated weaker this time. Because if what he was saying was true, then everything I believed for 5 years might have been wrong. Paul swallowed hard before speaking again. The money transfer happened while I was already in Spain. His voice shook slightly now. Victor emptied the account through forged authorization documents. I stared at him in shock. And you only found out 2 years later? Paul's expression darkened completely. He died before I could. Silence filled the SUV instantly. Rain hammered softly against the windows while my heartbeat pounded louder and louder inside my ears. Nothing felt stable anymore. Not my anger, not my memories, not even the story I'd spent 5 years using to survive. Because if Paul didn't betray me intentionally, then what exactly had we lost all those years for? And somehow, that possibility hurt even worse. I didn't know which hurt more. The possibility that Paul had lied to me for 5 years, or the possibility that he hadn't. Because if he was telling the truth, then everything I built my survival around suddenly collapsed beneath me. My anger to him, why hatred, to him, why closure. All of it depended on believing Paul chose to abandon me. But what if he didn't? The thought made me physically nauseous. I stared down at the old phone still sitting in my lap. My reflection looked pale against the cracked screen. There's no way, I whispered. Paul stayed quiet. And somehow, his silence felt more honest than any apology could have. Slowly, I pressed the power button. The phone flickered weakly before lighting up. Then my chest stopped working entirely. The wallpaper was still us. Me laughing while Paul kissed my cheek outside the laundromat apartment. A photograph from before everything went wrong. Before fame. Before betrayal. Before 5 years of grief turned me into someone colder. Believing Paul should have made things easier. Instead, it made everything worse. Because hatred is simple. Hatred gives pain direction. It gives heartbreak somewhere to go. For 5 years, I survived by telling myself Paul Callahan betrayed me for fame and money. That story became the foundation holding my entire life together. But now I was sitting inches away from the man I spent years mourning and realizing he might have been grieving me too. And I didn't know what to do with that. I wiped my face angrily before looking away from him. This doesn't fix anything. Paul nodded immediately. I know. No, I don't think you do. My voice trembled again despite my efforts to stay calm. You don't get to show up after 5 years with old messages and expect everything to suddenly make sense. I'm not asking for that. Then what are you asking for? Paul stared at me for a long moment before answering quietly. One chance to tell you everything. Something dangerous flickered inside my chest hearing that. Because once upon a time, I would have given Paul anything he asked for. And that terrified me. I turned toward the window quickly, trying to steady myself. Outside, reporters still lingered near the apartment building entrance, hoping for another glimpse of football's golden star and the mysterious woman from his past. My life used to be invisible. Now it felt like the whole world was watching me fall apart in real time. I should go home, I whispered. Paul's expression tightened instantly. It isn't safe right now. I almost laughed. Safe. I looked back at him bitterly. Paul, you are the reason my life stopped being safe. The words hit him hard. Good. Because no amount of sadness in his eyes could erase what those years did to me. The panic attacks, the trust issues, the constant fear of depending on someone again. Even after rebuilding my life, part of me never recovered from the night he disappeared. Paul looked down briefly before speaking again. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. You don't. I know. And I'm still angry at you. You should be. I stared at him in frustration. Why was he making this harder? I wanted to hate him properly, I wanted him selfish, cruel, easy to blame. But the man sitting across from me looked destroyed, just being near me again. That softness in him. The The same softness I once loved was still there beneath the fame and expensive clothes and stadium lights. And I hated myself for noticing. A soft buzz interrupted the silence. Paul glanced at his phone briefly before muting it immediately. But not before I saw the name flashing across the screen. Ivy Callahan. A woman. Something cold twisted unexpectedly in my stomach. I looked away before he noticed my reaction. Of course there would be someone else now. Paul was one of the most famous athletes in the world. Women probably threw themselves at him daily. The thought shouldn't have bothered me. So why did it? Paul noticed my expression anyway. It's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. I didn't say anything. She's my sister. I blinked. What? My younger sister. He hesitated slightly. You never met her because she was still in boarding school back then. Embarrassment burned through me instantly. Great. Now I looked jealous on top of emotionally unstable. I wasn't asking, I muttered. But Paul's lips twitched slightly for the first time since seeing me again. And God help me. For one dangerous second, he looked like the old Paul again. The boy who used to tease me after long shifts, just to make me smile. The realization hit me so hard I immediately looked away. No, I couldn't let myself fall backward into memories again. That road nearly destroyed me once already. Paul's expression softened while watching me quietly. You still play with your rings when you're nervous. I froze instantly. Without realizing it, I had been twisting the silver ring on my finger repeatedly. A habit he used to notice all the time. My chest tightened painfully. You notice too much. I never stopped noticing you. The words landed between us like a live wire. For a second, neither of us moved. And suddenly the air inside the SUV felt too heavy, too intimate, too full of things neither of us knew how to survive anymore. Then Paul's phone buzzed again. This time his entire expression changed the moment he looked at the screen. Sharp, alert, worried. What? I asked immediately. He didn't answer right away. And somehow, that scared me instantly. Paul looked up slowly. There's a problem. Every nerve in my body tightened. What kind of problem? He hesitated, then quietly said, Someone leaked your address online. For a second, I genuinely stopped breathing. What? Paul's face had gone completely serious now, every trace of softness disappearing instantly. Someone posted your apartment address on a football forum about 20 minutes ago, he said carefully. It's spreading fast. A cold wave of panic crashed through me. No. I grabbed my phone immediately with shaking hands. And there it was. Screenshots, threads, posts with thousands of comments. She lives here. Paul Callahan's secret ex finally found. People were reposting photos of my apartment building like it was some tourist attraction. My stomach turned violently. Oh my God. Suddenly the reporters outside didn't feel annoying anymore. They felt dangerous. What kind of people are posting this? I whispered. Paul's jaw tightened hard. Fans. Bloggers. Obsessive idiots who think they're detectives. I kept scrolling despite knowing I shouldn't. One comment read, She must be the woman who inspired his career. Another, Imagine dumping Paul Callahan before he became rich. I laughed bitterly under my breath. If only they knew. Then another comment appeared. She probably wants money now that he's successful. That one hurt more than it should have. Because after everything, people still found ways to blame women first. Paul noticed my expression immediately. Stop reading those. It's easy for you to say. My voice cracked slightly. You're used to this. His eyes darkened instantly. You think I ever wanted this life for you? I looked away. 5 years ago, Paul dreamed about packed stadiums and cameras and screaming fans. Back then, it sounded beautiful. Now it felt horrifying. Another wave of notifications flooded my screen. Unknown accounts were already messaging me directly. Some supportive, some cruel, some invasive. One message simply read, Did he really abandon you after you paid for his career? I locked my phone immediately. My hands wouldn't stop shaking anymore. I need to go home, I whispered again. Paul shook his head instantly. You can't. I'm not staying in a car with you all night. You can stay at my hotel. I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Absolutely not. Olla, listen to me carefully. His voice lowered seriously. This isn't normal attention anymore. Some fans get obsessive. If reporters stay outside your building all night, eventually other people show up too. Fear crawled slowly up my spine. Because deep down, I knew he was right. I'd already seen enough online to understand how quickly strangers could become dangerous. Still, the idea of staying anywhere near Paul felt emotionally reckless. You really expect me to trust you after everything? Pain flickered across his face again. No, he admitted softly. But I'm still asking. That answer hit harder than excuses would have, because there was no arrogance in him anymore. No entitlement. Just regret. And somehow, that made him harder to resist. I looked down at my hands silently while rainwater slid across the SUV windows beside us. 5 years ago, if Paul asked me to follow him anywhere, I would have done it without hesitation. Now, even sitting beside him felt dangerous. Not because I thought he would hurt me, but because part of me still remember how much I once loved him. And that terrified me more than reporters ever could. Paul's phone buzzed again. This time he answered immediately. What? His expression darkened almost instantly. No, don't let anyone through. A pause. Then, move them farther back from the entrance. My stomach tightened. How many people are outside? Paul looked toward the window briefly before answering. Too many. The realization settled heavily over me. My life wasn't private anymore. Not after last night. Not after the interview. Not after Paul said my existence mattered to him in front of millions of people. For 5 years, I survived quietly. Now suddenly the world wanted a piece of my pain. I closed my eyes briefly. This is exactly why people like us don't belong with people like you. Paul frowned immediately. What does that mean? It means famous people destroy everything they touch. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were honest. Because sitting here now, surrounded by security guards and camera flashes and internet chaos, I realized something painful. Paul and I no longer belonged to the same world. He was stadium lights, luxury hotels, global headlines. And I was still the woman counting grocery prices before checking out. Paul looked at me for a long moment, then quietly said, "You were the only real thing in my world." My chest tightened so painfully I almost looked away. But before either of us could say another word, headlights suddenly flashed behind the SUV. Then another car pulled aggressively toward us. Fast. Too fast. Paul's entire body tensed instantly. And for the first time since seeing him again, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The black SUV behind us stopped, so suddenly its tires screeched against the wet pavement. My entire body jerked instinctively. Paul turned sharply toward the tinted window, his expression hardening in a way I had never seen before. Not football star Paul. Not the gentle boy I used to love. This version of him looked dangerous. "Stay inside," he said immediately. "What's happening?" But before he could answer, another car pulled in behind the first one. Then another. My stomach dropped. Outside, camera flashes exploded wildly as reporters rushed closer, sensing drama. Security guards immediately moved toward the vehicles, while voices echoed through the rain-covered street. Paul swore quietly under his breath. "What is it?" I asked again, pulse rising. He looked at me for one brief second. "Paparazzi." Relief almost hit me before I noticed the expression on his face. Because Paul still looked tense. Too tense. "That's not all, is it?" He hesitated, and that hesitation terrified me instantly. One of the cars belongs to Victor Hale's son. The name hit me like ice water. Victor Hale. The man Paul claimed stole my money before dying years ago. I stared at him. "What?" Paul's jaw tightened hard. "His son's been trying to contact me for months." "Why?" "He thinks I ruined his father's reputation after everything came out." A cold feeling settled deep in my chest. What exactly came out? Paul looked exhausted suddenly. The financial fraud investigation. I blinked in confusion. There was an investigation? You really didn't know any of this? No. My voice cracked sharply. "Paul, I stopped following your life after you disappeared." For a second, guilt flashed across his face again. Then another loud bang echoed outside as someone hit the SUV window. I flinched violently. A man's voice shouted from outside. "Paul, is she the reason Victor Hale lost everything?" My blood ran cold. More camera flashes burst through the windows. The reporters weren't just interested in our relationship anymore. They knew about Victor. Paul immediately moved closer toward me instinctively, shielding me slightly from the windows. The movement was so familiar it hurt. Because years ago, Paul always positioned himself between me and danger without even thinking about it. Crossing busy streets, walking through crowds, late-night train stations. He used to protect me automatically. And terrifyingly, part of me still felt safe when he did. "Don't look outside," he said quietly. Too late. I already saw them. Dozens of people surrounding the SUV now. Cameras, phones, reporters yelling questions over one another while rain poured harder around them. And suddenly I understood something horrifying. This wasn't temporary chaos. This was Paul's normal life. Constant attention, constant pressure, constant invasion. No wonder he looked exhausted all the time now. Another aggressive knock hit the window beside me. "Olla Bennett," someone shouted. "Did Paul Callahan steal your money?" Paul's face darkened instantly. "That's enough," he muttered. Then he pressed a button near the door. The privacy divider slid down, revealing the driver and another security guard in the front. "Move the car," Paul ordered immediately. "We're boxed in right now," the driver answered tensely. My heartbeat sped up again. Boxed in? Outside, more shouting erupted. Then suddenly, a glass bottle smashed against the pavement near the SUV. I jumped violently. "What the hell?" Paul grabbed my hand before I could even think. "It's okay." But his voice sounded far from okay. The security guard in front cursed under his breath while speaking rapidly into an earpiece. The situation outside was escalating fast. And all because of me. The realization hit hard. 5 years ago, Paul's world was small enough for us to survive together. Now his life felt like a battlefield. I looked down suddenly and realized something else. Paul was still holding my hand. Firmly, protectively. His thumb brushed lightly against my knuckles like he was reassuring himself I was really there. The tiny gesture nearly destroyed me. Because my body still remembered him. Still responded to him. Still softened around him despite every reason not to. I slowly pulled my hand away. Paul looked at me immediately, hurt flickering across his expression before he masked it again. Good. Distance was safer. For both of us. Another voice shouted from outside. "Paul, did she leave you after the money scandal?" The question made something inside me snap. Before anyone could stop me, I reached forward and lowered the tinted window slightly. Paul's head whipped toward me instantly. "Olla." I ignored him. The reporters exploded into louder shouting the second they saw my face clearly. Cameras flashed nonstop. And for the first time in 5 years, I stopped hiding. "No," I said clearly into the storm of voices outside. "He left me." Silence hit the crowd for half a second. Then chaos erupted even louder. But I wasn't looking at the reporters anymore. I was looking directly at Paul. And the pain on his face told me those 4 words hurt him more than anything else I could have said. The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Not because they weren't true, but because of the look on Paul's face afterward. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But I did. Because once upon a time, I knew every expression he had before he even spoke. And right now, Paul looked like someone had driven a knife straight through his chest. The reporters immediately surged closer to the SUV. "What do you mean he left you? Did Paul Callahan abandon you after becoming famous? Was the relationship a lie?" Camera flashes exploded nonstop through the rain while security guards tried desperately to push people back. Paul slowly reached up and closed the window again without taking his eyes off me. Then silence filled the SUV once more. Heavy, painful, almost unbearable. Outside, the world screamed for answers. Inside, neither of us knew how to survive the truth anymore. Finally, Paul spoke quietly. "You really believe I left you?" I laughed bitterly. "You disappeared, Paul." "I came back. Too late." The words came out sharper than I intended. But maybe sharpness was the only thing protecting me now. Because every second spent near him weakened something inside me. Paul looked away briefly, jaw tight. "You think I don't know that?" I folded my arms across my chest, trying desperately to steady myself emotionally. "Then why are you here?" That question lingered between us for several seconds. Outside, security finally began forcing the crowd farther back. The noise softened slightly, though camera flashes still flickered endlessly against the rain-covered windows. Paul leaned back slowly against the seat, then finally answered, "Because I saw you." I frowned. "What does that mean?" His eyes met mine again. For 5 years, you existed only in memories. His voice lowered carefully. Then suddenly you were there again. Alive. Looking at me the same way you used to before everything fell apart. Something painful tightened in my throat, because I knew exactly what look he meant. The look from the train station, the look from our apartment, the look from every moment I loved him before fear replaced it. Paul swallowed hard before continuing. When they handed me the trophy tonight, none of it felt real. He glanced briefly toward the chaos outside. Not the stadium, not the cameras, not the fans. His eyes returned to mine slowly, because the only person I wanted to share it with disappeared years ago. I immediately looked away. No, I couldn't let him do this. Couldn't let him turn old feelings into weakness again. You don't get to say things like that now. Why? Because you lost that right. Paul nodded slowly like he expected that answer. You're right. The softness in his voice hurt worse than arguing would have. Because deep down, I wanted to hate him properly. But every time Paul looked at me now, it felt less like facing a villain and more like staring at someone equally broken. And that terrified me. My phone suddenly buzzed loudly in my coat pocket. I pulled it out automatically, then froze. The screen showed over 40 missed calls, most from unknown numbers. But one name made my stomach tighten instantly. Mrs. Bennett. My mother. Oh no. I had completely forgotten. She still didn't know anything about Paul. Not the breakup, not the money, not the years afterward. After my father died, my mother's health became fragile enough that I buried most of my pain to protect her. As far as she knew, Paul and I simply grew apart. If she saw the news, Olla. Paul noticed my expression immediately. I stood abruptly before I could think properly. I need to go. Paul frowned. Wait. My mother. Understanding flashed across his face instantly. She saw the news? I don't know. But panic was already rising fast inside me. Because if reporters found my address online, what stopped them from finding hers too? I grabbed my bag quickly. Paul moved immediately after me. I'm coming with you. No. Olla. No. I turned sharply toward him. You showing up near my mother is the last thing I need right now. His expression tightened painfully again. But before either of us could continue arguing, the security guard in front suddenly spoke urgently. Paul. Something in the man's voice made both of us look up immediately. The guard held out his phone with a grim expression. Paul took it. Then his entire face changed. Fear. Real fear. What? I asked instantly. Paul looked up at me slowly. And for the first time since seeing him again, he looked terrified. They found your mother's house. Everything inside me went cold. What? Paul stood up so fast the SUV shifted slightly beneath us. They found your mother's address online, he repeated sharply while already typing something into his phone. My security team just intercepted screenshots before they spread further. For a second, I couldn't think properly. All I could see was my mother alone in her quiet little house with her garden roses and evening tea, and absolutely no idea how cruel the internet could become. No, I whispered. No. I grabbed my phone immediately and dialed her number with shaking hands. Please answer. Please answer. Please. Olla. My mother's soft voice finally came through. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. Mom. Honey, what is going on? She asked immediately, confusion trembling beneath her calm tone. There are people outside my house. My heart stopped. What? I think they're reporters. Her voice lowered nervously. One of them knocked earlier asking questions about some football player. Fear exploded through me instantly. Lock the doors right now. Olla, you're scaring me. I know, I'm sorry. Just please listen to me. Don't open the door for anyone. Paul was already speaking rapidly to someone through his earpiece beside me. Get a team there immediately, he ordered. Now. I turned toward him sharply. You sent security? I'm not waiting until this gets worse. My chest tightened painfully. 5 years ago, Paul disappeared when I needed him most. And now suddenly he was moving mountains to protect my family. The emotional whiplash was unbearable. On the phone, my mother sounded increasingly distressed. Olla, who is Paul Callahan? The question hit me like a physical blow, because I realized then that there was no hiding anymore. Not after the interview, not after the reporters, not after the internet dragged my private life into public view. I closed my eyes briefly. He's someone I used to know. A soft knock interrupted the conversation inside the SUV. The driver turned around carefully. "Route's clear now." Paul nodded once before looking back at me. "We're going to your mother's house." "No." I shook my head immediately. "If the reporters see us together there, it'll make things worse. They already know who you are." "I don't care." "I do." The force behind those two words stunned me into silence. Paul dragged a hand through his hair roughly, exhaustion written all over him now. "Alia, listen to me carefully." His voice lowered. "This stopped being gossip the second people started showing up at your mother's house." I looked away because deep down, I knew he was right, and I hated it. Because every time Paul protected me, it became harder to hold onto my anger. The SUV finally pulled away from the street, leaving the flashing cameras behind us. For several minutes, silence filled the car except for rain tapping softly against the windows. Then my mother suddenly spoke again through the phone. "There's another car outside now." I straightened immediately. "What kind of car?" "Black." She hesitated. "Men are getting out." Before panic could fully consume me, Paul spoke calmly beside me. "That's my security team." I looked at him. He was watching me carefully now, like he was trying to measure how close I was to falling apart. And maybe I was, because this entire situation felt unreal. 5 years ago, I was struggling to pay electricity bills while Paul disappeared into another world. Now that world had crashed violently back into mine. My mother exhaled shakily through the phone. "They said they're here to protect me." "They are," Paul answered before I could. Silence. Then my mother asked the one question I'd been dreading all night. "Is this the young man you used to love?" The air inside the SUV changed instantly. I looked away from Paul before answering. "Yes." My mother went quiet for a second, then softly said, "You used to cry over him when you thought I couldn't hear." My throat closed painfully. Beside me, Paul's entire expression broke. And suddenly, after years of anger and misunderstanding and silence, I realized something devastating. Paul wasn't the only one who suffered after we lost each other. We both did. The difference was, one of us became famous enough to hide pain behind trophies. The other had to survive it alone. By the time we reached my mother's neighborhood, the rain had finally stopped. The streets were quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that always comes before something bad happens. I stared out the SUV window as familiar houses passed by slowly. I grew up here. Every cracked sidewalk and leaning mailbox carried pieces of my childhood. And suddenly, I hated that strangers now knew where my mother lived. Paul's security vehicles were already parked outside the house when we arrived. 2 men in black suits stood near the gate scanning the street carefully while another spoke into an earpiece beside the porch. The sight felt surreal. My mother's tiny flower-covered home looked absurdly fragile surrounded by luxury security cars. Paul noticed my expression immediately. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For bringing this into your life again." Again. That word stayed with me. Because part of me wanted to scream that he never had the right to return at all. But another part kept remembering the unread messages on that old phone. Messages from a man who thought I abandoned him too. The SUV stopped fully. Before I could open the door, Paul caught my wrist gently. The touch instantly sent warmth through me despite everything. "Alia." I looked at him carefully. "If reporters are still nearby, stay behind security until we get inside." I almost argued automatically. Then I saw how serious his expression was. Not controlling, not arrogant, protective, and terrifyingly familiar. I slowly nodded once. The second I stepped outside the SUV, cold air rushed against my face. One of the security guards immediately moved closer while scanning the street. No reporters. At least not yet. I hurried toward the front door, heart pounding harder with every step. Then the door opened before I could knock. My mother stood there wearing her pale blue sweater and worried expression, looking far smaller than I remembered. The second she saw me, relief flooded her face. "Alia." I rushed into her arms immediately. For a moment, I forgot about reporters. Forgot about Paul. Forgot about everything except the comfort of home. My mother held my face gently after pulling back. "You scared me." "I'm sorry." Then her eyes lifted over my shoulder and landed directly on Paul. The silence that followed felt endless. Paul stood near the porch steps now, rainwater still darkening parts of his coat, despite the fame and expensive clothes and security guards surrounding him. For 1 second, He looked exactly like the nervous young man who first came to dinner at this house years ago. The boy who brought cheap flowers because he couldn't afford anything else. My mother stared at him quietly, then softly said, "You came back." The pain that crossed Paul's face nearly broke me. "Yes," he answered quietly. My mother looked between both of us slowly, and I realized then that maybe she understood more than I thought she did all these years. She stepped aside gently. "Come inside before the neighbors start inventing stories." Paul hesitated immediately. "I don't want to intrude." "You already survived my husband's cooking once," my mother replied calmly. "You can survive tea." To my complete shock, Paul actually smiled. Small, tired, but real. And suddenly I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. My father loved Paul. Not because he was talented, not because of football, but because of the way Paul used to look at me. "He watches you like he's terrified the world might steal you," my father once whispered after dinner. Back then I laughed it off. Now those words hurt too much to remember. Inside the house, everything smelled exactly the same. Tea leaves, lavender, old books. My mother disappeared into the kitchen while I stood awkwardly near the living room doorway with Paul behind me. Neither of us knew how to exist around each other anymore. Finally, I turned toward him quietly. "You didn't have to come inside." "Yes," he said softly. "I did." I frowned slightly. "Why?" Paul looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Because 5 years ago, I left you alone when you were hurting." His voice lowered carefully. "I'm not doing that again." The words hit somewhere dangerously deep inside me. And for one terrifying second, I almost believed him. Then suddenly, headlights flashed through the front window. A car pulling up outside. Paul's expression changed instantly. Sharp, alert, wrong. One of the security guards near the door touched his earpiece urgently, then looked directly at Paul. "She's here." The entire room changed the second the guard said those 2 words. "She's here." Paul went completely still beside me. And somehow, that scared me more than the reporters did. Because in the short time since seeing him again, I had already learned something dangerous. Paul only looked afraid when the situation was serious. My mother stepped out of the kitchen carrying a tray of tea, just as the tension thickened inside the room. "What's wrong?" Neither of us answered immediately. Paul was already moving toward the front window carefully, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look outside. The muscles in his jaw tightened instantly. My stomach dropped. "Who is it?" Paul let the curtain fall slowly before turning toward me. And for the first time since he reappeared in my life, he looked genuinely cornered. "It's Celeste Hale." The name meant nothing to me at first. Then suddenly, Victor Hale's son. No, daughter. Ice flooded my chest instantly. The daughter of the man who stole my money? Paul nodded once. "She's been trying to contact me for months." "Why?" His silence answered before he did. "Because whatever reason brought her here. It wasn't good." Outside, a car door slammed shut. Then another. I moved toward the window before Paul could stop me. A sleek, black car sat parked outside my mother's house now. Rainwater still glistened across the hood beneath the streetlights. And standing beside it was a woman in a cream-colored coat with dark hair falling over one shoulder. Elegant, beautiful, dangerous. Even from a distance, she carried herself with a kind of confidence that made people nervous. One of Paul's security guards stepped in front of her immediately. She ignored him completely. Instead, her eyes lifted directly toward the house. Toward us. My chest tightened unexpectedly when I realized something else. She knew Paul personally. Not casually. Personally. The familiarity in the way she looked toward him made something uncomfortable twist inside me. Paul stepped beside me carefully. "She shouldn't be here." I folded my arms tightly across myself. "You keep saying that about everyone." His eyes flicked toward me briefly. "This isn't the same." The front gate creaked open outside. My mother looked increasingly confused now. "Olla, who exactly is that woman?" Before I could answer, Paul spoke quietly. "Trouble." And somehow, the way he said it made my pulse spike instantly. A sharp knock echoed through the house. Nobody moved. Another knock came louder this time. Then a woman's voice carried through the door. "Paul." Just hearing the familiarity in her tone made something bitter rise unexpectedly inside me. Paul closed his eyes briefly like he was already exhausted. My mother looked between us carefully before whispering to me, "She's beautiful." I almost laughed at the timing. Because yes, she was the kind of woman who belonged beside famous athletes and flashing cameras and luxury events. Not women like me. Women who spent years rebuilding their lives quietly after heartbreak. The thought hit harder than I expected. Paul noticed my expression immediately, and suddenly his entire focus shifted toward me. Olla, it's fine, I said quickly, but my voice betrayed me. Because deep down, seeing another woman tied to Paul's world hurt more than it should have. Especially a woman this polished, this composed, this close to him. Another knock interrupted the silence. Then Celeste spoke again. I know you're in there. Paul exhaled sharply before looking toward the door. She won't leave. How comforting, I muttered. His eyes snapped back to mine immediately. There's nothing between us. I hated how fast relief moved through me hearing that. Absolutely hated it. Because relief meant I still cared. And I didn't want to. Not anymore. Paul moved toward the front door slowly while security remained nearby. Every instinct inside me screamed that this woman's arrival was about to change everything again. The moment the door opened, Celeste Hale stepped inside without waiting for permission. And the second her eyes landed on me, she smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, knowingly. Then she looked at Paul and quietly said, "So this is the girl my father destroyed your life over." The room went silent after Celeste's words. Not ordinary silence. The kind that presses against your chest until breathing feels difficult. So this is the girl my father destroyed your life over. I stared at her without knowing how to respond. Because somehow, hearing the truth spoken so casually by a stranger made everything feel even more unreal. Paul stepped forward immediately. Celeste, enough. But she barely looked at him. Her attention stayed fixed on me with unsettling calm. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Beautiful in that effortless, expensive way people like her always seem to be. Every detail about her looked controlled, from her posture to the careful softness in her voice. And suddenly I understood why Paul looked tense the moment she arrived. This woman carried secrets. Dangerous ones. My mother stood frozen near the kitchen doorway, clearly trying to understand what kind of storm had entered her home. "What does she mean?" she asked quietly. No one answered immediately. Because where exactly were we supposed to start? With stolen money? With broken lives? With 5 years of grief built on lies? Celeste finally stepped farther into the room. "I didn't come here to fight," she said calmly. "That's funny," I replied before I could stop myself. "Because you walked into my mother's house talking like a villain in a crime documentary." To my surprise, the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. "She has your attitude," she murmured toward Paul. "I'm serious," Paul warned sharply. The familiarity between them hit me again instantly. Too comfortable. Too practiced. A painful thought slipped into my head before I could stop it. Had she been beside him all these years? At award shows? At celebrations? At the moments that should have belonged to us? I hated how much that possibility bothered me. Celeste noticed the shift in my expression immediately. And somehow, that made me dislike her more. "There's nothing romantic between us," she said suddenly. My face heated instantly. "I didn't ask." "No," she replied calmly. "But you were wondering." Paul dragged a frustrated hand across his face. "Celeste." "What?" She finally looked at him directly. "You brought me into this years ago." My stomach tightened. What does that mean? For the first time since arriving, something flickered across Celeste's expression. Guilt. Real guilt. She looked at me carefully before speaking again. "My father stole your money." Hearing it said out loud made my chest ache unexpectedly. Not because I didn't already know, but because for years, that theft became the foundation of my heartbreak. The thing that destroyed everything between me and Paul. Celeste continued quietly. "He forged documents using access Paul unknowingly gave him while signing international contracts." I looked toward Paul slowly. He didn't deny it. "My father controlled most of Paul's finances in the beginning," Celeste explained, "including temporary authority over linked accounts." "And nobody noticed?" I asked bitterly. "He was good at hiding things." Paul laughed once under his breath. A cold, humorless sound. "He stole from a lot of people." The room fell quiet again. My mother slowly placed the untouched tea tray onto the table before sitting down carefully, like her legs suddenly felt weak. I realized then how overwhelming this must sound to her. 5 years ago, I told everyone Paul simply left. Now suddenly, there were fraud investigations and stolen money and security guards outside her house. It sounded insane even to me. Celeste looked back at me softly. My father became obsessed with Paul's career. Paul's jaw tightened immediately. He thought emotional attachments made athletes weak. The words hit harder than expected, because suddenly I remembered what Paul told me earlier. Victor Hale said I was holding him back. My chest tightened. So he separated us, I whispered. No, Paul said quietly. He destroyed us. The pain in his voice almost shattered me. Celeste folded her arms slowly. My father believed if Paul became emotionally isolated, he'd focus entirely on football. Her eyes lowered briefly. And unfortunately, he was right. Nobody spoke after that. Because what exactly do you say after learning someone manipulated your entire future? I looked toward Paul again. Champions League winner. Global superstar. The man the world envied. And suddenly all I could see was a 26-year-old boy alone in another country believing the woman he loved abandoned him. The realization hurt too much. Paul noticed me looking at him, and quietly asked the question neither of us was ready for. If we had known the truth back then. His voice broke slightly. Would we still have lost each other?